Vanguard!
Planet's Craze battlefields are thrown into chaos with the uprising of immense power emanating from the astral plane, as well as the new battle Hardened Angels and the Stealth Dragons. But Nova Grappler has a secret weapon up their sleeve. Genesis may channel the power of a true god, but Nova's got the power to knock out any deity. This is Ragnarok in fist form. This is Fighting Fist Dragon, God Hand Dragon. Fighting Fist Dragon, God Hand Dragon is the fourth VR to join the ranks within Nova Grappler circuit. Together with his disciples, they take Nova Grappler and even the battlefields of Cray by storm. They focus on a pure all balls to the walls playstyle where they focus on empowering their attacks by empowering the effects of front triggers, and God Hand Dragon stands in the center of this. Quite literally. God Hand Dragon has two very insanely powerful abilities that can make or break your matches. His first ability is a passive ability that allows him to empower your front triggers. When drive checking, they get an increase of 10k power, turning your front triggers in a plus 20k to the front row, which can give you insane amounts of power to the field for no cost. His second ability complements his passive ability and mitigates his weaknesses, as on attack for the cost of a discard and a counterblast, you can give him an extra drive which helps you to get to those front triggers. But if your opponent is sitting on a grade 3 or higher Vanguard, then you also get an additional crit, which will help with pressure, as this Nova Grappler build will mainly run fronts and practically no crits. God Hand Dragon is a very fast-paced deck that is very unlikely to go past turn 4. But there is a major weak point. Or you could say 2. It relies heavily on drive checking fronts, and the deck has almost no plus engine. These weaknesses can be combated to some degree with the amazing support cards. The main line consists out of two key cards, Fusing Striker and Silver Fist. Fusing Striker has a similar effect that empowers your front triggers that can stack together with himself and God Hand Dragon to really empower your front rows to insane levels. This also allows you to do some aggressive early game plays where you can have a 24k swing on turn 2 if you manage to hit a front. He is also a good consistency tool to get to your God Hand Dragons, as without God Hand Dragon, the deck falls quite short on brute power, but that is where Fusing Striker and Silver Fist come into play. Silver Fist allows you to have the aggression from basically turn 1, which means you can threaten your opponent right from out the gates. Also, thanks to these two cards, if you happen to sit on another grade 3, you can still benefit from hitting front triggers more than you would otherwise, meaning you can combine them with other powerful Vanguards, like Ultra Beast Deity Illuminal Dragon. Illuminal is a perfect support card for God Hand Dragon. Not only can this card become an insane beater, as the unhitability will almost always activate if you hit a front trigger, but his Vanguard ability is insanely strong in combination with Silver Fist and Fusing Striker, as high powered combined with multi-attacks is always a dangerous concoction. Another great support grade 3 is Power Trooper Singh. This card helps you drive checking fronts during your turn. Also, having the drive check pressure on your rear guards is pretty strong, especially in this deck, as it most likely will result in a no guard, which otherwise would just be guarded, or is a good chance where you can break through guard, wasting more shield from your opponent's hand. A grade 1 with a similar effect is Guntrooper Clefs. Although Clefs can drive check himself, he can give you more drive checks if you don't hit those so important front triggers. This can increase the consistency of your deck and combat field control clans a bit, but it also makes your Sings even better, as they have the potential to attack with a twin drive. This means your opponent won't know when you will use your clef, which might force your opponent to place guard on an attack they otherwise didn't want to do. We have seen that we can empower our front triggers to build insane numbers, but we can also benefit from front triggers in more than one way. A good example is Gain X2. This unit allows you to achieve some multi-attacks as well. This works well with Clefs, as Clefs can boost the first attack to hit a solid number, and then afterwards, when you resend Gain X2, he can hit on his own thanks to the front power. This gives Nova multi-attacks that doesn't cost any resources. A lot of units in this deck relies on front triggers, and if we have to leave it to chance, then it's very likely this deck can perform well enough. was it not for Grid Bengal. This card makes the deck tick. Having the ability to force at least one front is insanely powerful with all the other cards we discussed so far. And if we feel frisky, you can even stack multiple fronts if you have more copies of this card in your hand, including front triggers of course. So far we have a Luminol that as a backup Vanguard can restand an attack, and we have Gain X2 that can restand in some cases. But thanks to Kick Typhoon, we can fully abuse the value this deck can generate, as we can restand any rearguard after front triggers hits the field. Meaning we can restand a potential 30 to 60k unit to bash our opponent for another round. A similar card to Kick Typhoon is High Power Custom Riser. There are only a few diversions to this card, which makes it useful in other situations. A good diversion is the on-hit pressure, works perfectly on turn 2 as a Vanguard unit, as it forces your opponent to overcommit when you have Fusing Striker on the board. It also helps forcing your opponent to guard early attacks that can cost 20 to 40k shield, which they rather wanted to take if they aren't on 5 damage. This works even better with the grade 2 that can swing with 2 crits, which we'll cover later in the video. The last card I want to highlight is Clay Doll Mechanic. This card helps you when you have no resources left. What's great about this deck is it doesn't matter what your front row really looks like. If you are on God Hand Dragon and you drive check a front, you will hit hard, even when you call triggers. Also, the extra counterblast can come in handy in all kinds of situations. It works great in combination with Clefs, as you can have a disappearing column, especially if you have Sing on the field. You can stack the deck with Bengal, meaning you can hit hard and then you resolve them once you attack with God Hand Dragon. Also, in the early game, you can use it to attack 5 times on turn 2 if you only have one counterblast, but you have High Power Custom Riser and Kick on the field. This new Nova Grappler uses only one main resources, and that is Counterblast. You either use it to increase the amount of drive checks or you increase the number of attacks. It's really important to know when to use which, as multi-attacking without power is quite pointless, but also gaining more drive checks if you're already seen 2 fronts might be a bit of an overkill. Another thing to keep track is your hand size, as this deck inherently doesn't plus that well. In terms of triggers, you might already caught on what type of triggers you're supposed to play. It's all about fronts, and even more fronts. If we could, we would play 16 fronts. This means the other 4 trigger slots are open for heals, draw RPGs, and maybe even crits, if you feel gutsy. I highly recommend to play the bare minimum of 8 fronts for this deck. Also, draw RPGs have more value in this deck than heals, as for one, you get more cards in your hand, but also heals are less likely to activate, as this deck is all about going full throttle. The ideal gift marker for this deck is most likely Axel 2, as you don't really need the 5k power with all the crazy power you will generate, and the extra draw can do a lot. That said, the 10k markers can fulfill an important role as well. As discussed, this deck has its fair bit of reliance on RNG for hitting those fronts. In the case you don't hit them, then the extra power base can come in quite handy for maintaining a solid pressure base to still win the game once that RNG kicks in. God Hand Dragon on first glance looks to be a very linear and one-dimensional deck to play and build. But surprisingly, there are your fair share of build options and playstyles you can adopt while using this card. Today we'll highlight 2 different builds, one that focuses on going all out, full throttle, without having any sense of your own safety, and another build that borrows powerful tools from the Beast Deity engine to increase the overall consistency of the deck and give it a whole range of extra lines of play, previously only exclusive to the Beast Deity archetype. But before all that, let's take a look at the God Hand Dragon straight out of the box from Infinideity Cradle. This list contains almost everything we already covered in this video. We have God Hand, Fusing Striker, and Silver Fist to empower our front triggers. We have Sing and Clefs to increase our drive check count to increase our chances to hit fronts. We have Gain X2 plus 2 new phase to benefit from the front triggers even more than the usual power. And we have Grid Bengal to enable all of this. This version, outside of Silver Fist, really start to rule from turn 2. This in part is thanks to Selnoin and Guatron Liger. Selnoin allows you to really benefit from those high numbers, as having an extra crit on top of these high attacks will force guard from your opponent a lot sooner than with only 1 crit attacks. Guatron Liger combats one of the biggest problems of this deck: draw power. Because it's an on-hit effect, this card will do one of 2 things. Either your opponent is wasting guard way sooner than they otherwise would, or you get the plus technically for free, as it's a non-cost for this deck. Combining the grade 2s with Fusing Striker, you can build a good pressure turn before you go into God Hand. From turn 3, you basically flood the front row to hit hard. Regarding to Sing, because this deck lacks combo cards, it's best to always attack first with the Vanguard and then with Sing. This way you get more value out of both attacks as you force more potential guard from your opponent. This build is quite easy to understand and is quite beginner friendly. You slam units on the board and drive check fronts to win. But if we take a look at a version that uses the Bestiality cards, then suddenly the deck becomes quite a lot more complex. We can really see that with the following list. This build only had the 4 basic cards from the God Hand Dragon engine. The rest is completely replaced with new cards. We have a Luminal Dragon as a support grade 3, but we also have 2 copies of Azure Dragon. This card is great for the mid game as it preserves our resources to some extent while slowly putting our opponent at kill range, and the extra draws helps us dig deeper to our God Hand Dragons. Brutal Jack is here for a solid aggression that will always give us some solid value even if we don't hit those important front triggers. Shout is here to fulfill a very important role. His ability allows us to get those important draws because we're looking for our grade 2s and grade 3s. The only scenario where we lose them is if our opponent gets a grade 3 or grade 4. Which isn't a big problem as they have 0 shield value. Also, they won't get most of their triggers, as if they do, that means we most likely get a front trigger of our own, which means Grid Bengal has a target. The last new card that rounds up this package is Scarlet Bird. Scarlet Bird is another draw engine, but it also allows us to fully utilize Shout, Brutal Jack and Azure Dragon. As soon as turn 1, you want to utilize Shout to set up all of your plays. Then for turn 2, you can really bring the Pain Hammer thanks to the 90k beaters and the restand of Kick. From turn 3, you can go into any of the grade 3s depending on your game state. Azure Dragon is a great setup right when going first, God Hand Dragon is overall your go-to Vanguard, and Illuminal is a great finisher when your opponent is on 4 or 5 damage and you have 1 or 2 copies of Fusing Striker or Silver Fist on the field and you know you will hit a front. This build gives a lot more choices in terms of plays and decisions, but we can also throw the ball in our opponent's court and put all the decision making in their hands. This is the case with this balls to the walls build where we just keep slamming into our opponent and they have to decide which attack they feel the most comfortable with taking. Spoiler alert, it's none. This build is a very simple one to understand. Drive check fronts and win. The more detailed explanation is that you want to utilize Kick and high powered Riser Custom to reuse the value from the front triggers. This build will have a very scary grade 2 turn, mainly because of all the units that benefit from the front trigger. Fusing Striker as a Vanguard can suddenly become a 24k, which means guarding is almost not worth it. Custom Riser can hit for 24k without Fusing Striker if you hit the front trigger. That coupled with the on-hit effect put your opponent in a predicament. Solenoid can suddenly not only get the plus 10k, but also get a crit, which means all front triggers that turn also substitute as a crit trigger, which is very dangerous for your opponent. That combined with a Kick rearguard can make for some scary situations. For turn 3 and onwards, you want to use Kick and high power to resend your insane rearguards, preferably Solenoid, to really force guard as soon as possible. Besides that, there isn't much more to explain. Most of the critical thinking is done by your opponent as you force them to make tough decisions. If they want to guard your Vanguard on grade 2, or if they want to allow high power to hit if something like Solenoid is present on the field. All those decisions are probably going to result in wrong choice. God Hand Dragon is a super aggressive deck that rewards players that dare to take a risk. This means the absence of defensive triggers like heals and or draws. Also, you trade in draws for brute power. There are some ways to mitigate these flaws, but keep in mind that God Hand Dragon by nature is an RNG deck with an issue with hand size. If you're able to acknowledge these flaws, you're able to bring out the full potential out of this new Nova Grappler deck. Genesis thought they were immune to the mere mortals of Planet Cray. Little do they know that Nova Grappler possesses the power to kill gods. But to achieve this power, one needs to throw away any regards to one's own safety and doubt. Are you prepared to make that decision? Then take arms of God Hand Dragon and show the world what it really means to be a fighting fist Dragon. And that was our last deck spotlight for Infinideity Cradle, with the focus of course around God Hand Dragon. But it doesn't end here, as next time we take a look at all the budget decks that we can build from this set. So join us next time when we take a look at all the budget friendly options for Nova Grappler, Nubatama, Genesis, and even Angel Feathers. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/Vanguard Insider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support this channel and everything that's happening on the channel, then you can simply do that by going over to patreon.com/Vanguard Insider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!